flowering leaves of all these life-giving trees that flow in the breeze, giving us the air to breathe, came from the seeds that sons and daughters had sown, passing down histories through stories, genes, and bones. Hear the whispers of the past, dictate your prologue, a generational griot through which memories are prolonged. So we reach down like nourishing waters to seek truths, except we receive nourishment when we're digging the roots.
Hello and good evening. This is Kanika Smith here, and we are so glad that you have taken time out of your busy Wednesday evening to join us for the 42nd episode of BlackProGen Live. We have an amazing topic up for discussion tonight. We have so much content to get to. I mean, gosh, we could literally stay here for the next 3 days talking about everything surrounding the topic at hand. But I just want to go ahead and say early on, thank you so much for joining us, for taking your time out, for perhaps missing an episode of your favorite show. If you're like me and you love This Is Us, it came on last night. Unfortunately, I fell asleep and did not watch the entire episode, but when we're done tonight, I'll pick up on that in my favorite show, Greenleaf, on OWN. But for the next hour and some change, you're going to be joining us for the topic, Getting Started with Latin Research. The connections between the African diaspora and Latin populations are undeniable and can provide a rich textured genealogy research project. Join us tonight as we discuss how to get started, resources, and more. Before we get into the content at hand, just want to do some reminders as usual. Be sure to join the conversation now. Participate in the live chat on YouTube to the top right of the screen if you're watching on a computer, and at the bottom of the YouTube app on your mobile device. You can also weigh in on Twitter by tweeting us at BlackProGen or using the hashtag BlackProGen. Of course, Twitter, is operational whenever you want. So if you see a news article, something you think might be of interest to us, be sure to @ us or hashtag us, and we'll be sure to connect with you on that topic. Tonight, of course, True Lewis is manning Twitter as she does every single episode of BlackProGen Live. So be sure to let her know you're out there watching. Have you been like, oh man, I can't believe I missed that episode. I need reminders. Well, here's your reminder to set reminders. All you need to do is head to my YouTube page and click Set Reminder under the episode you're interested in. Or you can simply subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll get a reminder each and every time we go live for BlackProGen Live. Before we actually get into the content for the evening, I just wanted to take some time to pause for the cause, because we've had some deaths in our group, and I wanted to make sure that I acknowledge the ancestors that have gone on. BlackProGen Live is all about genealogy, and it wouldn't be possible without the elders who lived to create each and every one of us tonight. We're going to take a moment to pause and remember 3 of our elders who we've lost in the last 2 months. The first is Orlando Fernandez Sr., father of our own Ellen Fernandez Sacco. He was born in New York City and moved to Spring Hill 16 years ago from Queens, New York. He retired from the New York Transit Authority and was a U.S. Navy veteran. The next elder that we lost was Elmer Eulalie Godot Robertson, the great-grandmother of Alex Traps Trabala, who lived to be 98 years old, was happy and full of many stories that she loved to share. Alex was able not only to get her stories recorded, but also have her DNA tested this year. And finally, we have to also salute James Morgan Sr., grandfather of our own James Morgan III. He was born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. He was a World War II veteran of General Mark Clark's 5th Army Corps, a retired newspaper printer, and the originator of the name of one of our great favorite genealogy buds. Tonight, we salute Orlando, Elmer, and James, honor their lives, and are grateful for the legacy they leave behind in their children and grandchildren. So be sure, if you're connected to Ellen, if you're connected to Alex, if you're connected to James through social media, be sure to send them some hugs and some love, because we've lost all 3 of these people in the last few months. All right, now that we've all sort of wiped our tears and emoted, that was hard. but I had to make sure there was no way I could not say anything, because with this group we interact with each other quite a bit, and to lose three key people like that in the last couple months was a big hit. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we recognized them. And in fact, James came on briefly before we actually went live tonight, and just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's reached out to him with regard to his grandfather, and that he was going to try to watch tonight live, because he's actually en route to his services in New Jersey tonight. So sending you virtual hug, Ellen, because you're the only one who's on right now. All right, so let's go ahead and get into introductions and our topic for the evening. We're honoring Orlando tonight, and a little bit of Elmer, because Alex does have some ties to Latin research himself. So let's see, True, I'm putting you on the spot. You're going to go first for introductions.
Hello, everyone. It's me, True Lewis from My True Roots. I'm here in Kentucky, and I'm just excited. I'm always excited every episode, but yeah, I don't know too much about Latin research, but I just know I got my pad ready for goodies and links. So
you're gonna be writing a lot tonight.
yes, so this is I'm dedicating this to Puddin tonight. This is for her.
All right, go to good old Put. She's always in the house. All right, let's go next, Tony.
Hello, Gen friends. It's Tony Carrier from the Center for Family History at the International African American Museum, and coming to you from Charleston, South Carolina tonight.
All right, my favorite redhead, no question. Let's go with Renata. Unmute yourself, Renata. Anybody else see her arms like flail?
I'm special. Good evening, everybody. This is Renata Yarbrough Sanders coming to you from Newport News, Virginia. My blog is Into the Light. Please look me up, and I'm glad to be here tonight. I have not done Latin research, but I'll support in any way I can, and just looking forward to learning along with everyone else.
And someone said earlier, you speak Spanish?
Sí, yo hablo.
Go ahead, put the, yeah. Everybody take note. She can translate your documents. She may not know exactly what they're for, but think about it. She's got a special skill, so you got to put that out there as well. All right.
I can open a dictionary too.
I was gonna say, me too. Random facts. Totally off subject, but my mother seemed to think that her encyclopedias from her childhood would somehow last to mine. There was 36 years between us, and it just so happens that the encyclopedias that she had actually had a number of different languages translations to English, and that's also what I ended up using that for Spanish. And I would go to class and have certain words, and my teacher would be like, "What's that?" Because these encyclopedias were from 1963.
Wow.
No Martin Luther King. He didn't exist. I was like, Mom, these are not right. I can't do my report. Angela, you're up next.
Hello, everyone. Coming to you from greetings to everyone. Saludos, amigos, and sending special love to Alex, to James, y mi amiga Ellen. Te amo, te quiero.
Yeah, Angela is fluent in Spanish.
Totally fluent.
She's totally fluent in Spanish. No, I'll tell the story later how I found that out. All right. Next up, we're gonna have let's do Ellen.
Hey everybody, it's Ellen Fernandez-Sacco, Latino Genealogy blogspot.com, which I'm working on a new website, and I'll have more news about that later. But thanks so much for joining us tonight, and thanks so much. It's so good to be with all of you, and most of my heart's also breaking with all the stuff that's happening in Puerto Rico, and we just got to keep this knowledge out there and keep people going. So I'm really glad to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Teresa.
Hey, it's Theresa Vega from Radiant Roots Boricua Branches, representing uptown near the Boogie Down, New York City. I am, of course, with Ellen. You see my alma taina. My heart is breaking. I just want to do a shameless plug. I created, because I feel so helpless now, a page on my blog spot for Puerto Rican relief sources. Please, if you can, take the time to give whatever you can give, not only to Puerto Rico, but to all the other islands in the Caribbean that have been affected as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's important. I think a lot of people are skeptical and not sure where to give money because they want to make sure that it gets there. So,
and that's why I created the page of reputable, verified groups, either local resources or generalized national organizations.
Awesome. All right, and last but not least, we have a new face with a flowery shirt on joining us in her office. I want to take this time to introduce my genia bud, Colleen Green, who is coming to us from, well, the sun might still be out, but I'm not quite sure.
I don't have windows, so I can't tell.
So Colleen is joining us from California, and just tell us a little bit about yourself. You don't have to get super detailed.
Sure. I am a third-generation Mexican-American. My great-grandparents immigrated from Mexico, and my grandfather was the first child born here. I'm an academic librarian and also a college instructor, and I've been doing my family history for 20 years, but my Mexican family history for only about 5, and that has now become my main focus and my teaching specialization.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And I'm your resident troublemaker, Kanika Smith, and host, blogger, presenter, all those sorts of things from whoisnikasmith.com. We've got our amazing chatters here. They've been chatting it up. Bernice Bennett, who is normally a panelist, she is in the chat room. Make sure you shout out to her. We also have Theresa. We all bounce back and forth. A lot of us do because we have attention deficit disorder, perhaps. Because we like to know what's going on in both spaces, which is great. We've got our good friend Tammy Ozier in Atlanta. Prieta Serrano, hello. Thanks for joining us. We also have, let's see who else is there. I think that's pretty much everyone. Oh, and Shelly, she says aloha. Shelly's in Hawaii.
What?
Is she in Hawaii? She didn't tell us anything, and she didn't ask us if we wanted to go.
Years.
She did. I was about to say she didn't ask us if we wanted to go. I do not appreciate that personally. Anywho, all right, so let's go ahead and jump into the topic of the evening, which is getting started with Latin research. And the thing is, I think folks are just, in some ways, I feel like folks are really intimidated by Latin research. Number one, I think that the number one issue is because of the language barrier. I think people feel like, oh my gosh, it's Spanish. But, you know, I kind of have to go back to, if your family's from Louisiana, if you get back so far, you're going to have to deal with French. So
and Spanish.
Exactly. And Spanish. I know, God, we got to be trilingual. But, you know, to me, it's like, especially with the proliferation of DNA and how that is changing the landscape. You know, I think about a cousin of mine that I connected with, Colleen, who until she took a DNA test, had no clue that she had second grade grandparents who were Mexican. And she identifies as African American, and how she was just like, I don't even know where to start. I don't know who to talk to, like anything. So what connection do you think that Latin research has with other people of color groups? You know, you were talking about the African diaspora. We're talking about Asian populations. I mean, this is a huge topic. I know we can't, you know, we could spend the rest of the show talking about connections, but what do you think of offhand when it comes to connections with other people of color groups?
I think there's a tremendous amount of just the economic structure. When you're talking about Spain, you're dealing with an empire that falls apart between the 15th to 19th centuries. And all those relationships impact the new world, shape the new world. It funds the old world, but I mean, and as it falls apart, it continually gets, the administrative structures change, and there's information in different places. But like, so that I'm just mentioning this because the power of the Spanish Empire in the beginning was immense, and it just wrapped around the world. So you can have DNA results, say, in the Philippines, and you'll have matches in Mexico, or you'll have matches in Colombia. So how did that happen? And if you go back far enough, you start to see these stories. You're not going to necessarily see stories traced through papers in some instances, but you will be able to tell some things. But the most basic thing is the people who are around you, the stories that are suppressed, the oral histories that you can pick up, all those kind of clues that you can find out, like, oh, they didn't tell me they were from there. They didn't tell me these things. I mean, people coming to the States in the 1950s, which is basically my generation, I'm born in 56, there's a lot of hidden knowledge. I think for younger generation, it's really much more on the table and much more willing, people are much more willing to discuss a lot more what were considered difficult or shameful topics before. I guess that's a huge jump. But I think about myself, like, you know, as a product of the diaspora, and like, I'm coming out of like the South Bronx, and how did I wind up there? If my people are in the islands, how did I wind up there? You know? So, I mean, tracing all of that is very powerful. And I think I've just gone all over the place, so please give me some guidance.
No, I think it was a great overview. It was a great overview.
Yeah.
I would want to just jump in and say something with that too. As you know, my husband's from Nigeria, and our niece, his niece, is here with us here in the U.S. while she's attending school, while she's going to Morgan State, and she became fascinated whenever I talk about DNA. So she said she'd like to take a DNA test, and she did. Her results have come back 100% African, but of course very mixed, not 100% Nigerian. That's no surprise. She told her mom about it, and her mother said, "Oh, that's so interesting. You know, on your grandmother's side, our name was originally Domingo. When we came back, our family came back from the Americas after slavery ended, and they came and settled in Lagos, which is really Lagos." Wow. And anyway, her DNA matches, just going up on GEDmatch, both on the X chromosome as well as the autosomal surnames. It's amazing the Spanish surnames that she's matching. And those Spanish surname individuals are 5-6 generations away from the common ancestor. Mm-hmm. And this is a young lady straight from Lagos, Nigeria, and who is matching people throughout the Americas. Some I know are Dominican Republic, many from Cuba, and of course there's also Brazil. And it's absolutely amazing. And some are Portuguese surnames as well, but many are Spanish surnames. Amazing. Right.
Right. Wow. So that's a very important point to make, though, Angela, at least at the beginning of what the conversation, right? Because people automatically think, okay, if I have somebody who's 100% African that's in my DNA results, then you know there's no tour of America that their lineage is taken. You know, their people have just stayed in Nigeria. But what you're saying is that what confirms her oral history is that her DNA mirrors the transatlantic slave trade in some ways, just like ours mirrors the transatlantic slave trade. And
even more so, yes.
Yeah, even more so.
And her mother's side is from Badagry. I'm sorry to interrupt. Her mother's from Badagry, and Badagry is like Elmina in Ghana, Elmina Castle, or the Maison des Clubs in Dakar, the door of no return. Badagry is the exit point of slaves from Nigeria. And that's where her mother's family is from. And many people, when they returned, they came back to Badagry. Wow. And it's amazing because you see all of the Americas reflected in this young lady with all her DNA matches in the Americas, and yet DNA saying that she's 100% African. Right.
I was going to add that, since we're talking about African roots in the Caribbean, I match 11 folks from Ghana on my Puerto Rican side. Okay, all of them are Fonte of the Akan group. If George, if you're out there, my cousin George. Exactly, and the connection is through the Puerto Rican side. I've actually had to inform them that, hey, you guys had folks who were part of the slave trade. Most of them did not know.
Right, right. Like, there's an amazing chart that's in this book which is from the Sociedad Puertorriqueña de Genealogía. It's the third volume on the Africans, the contributions of Africans to the Puerto Rican nation. And there's a chart that talks about the locations of people, and it spans about 1.5 pages, and it lists the ethnic regions. But what's so interesting, it's from different sources in the 16th to about 16th to 17th centuries, and all of these different locations, and these are all like potential ancestors for a lot of us, you know, from all of these locations. And I was just surprised to see something so specific. Because so often in the records that I just find a continent listed. I don't find a location, you know.
So to get Colleen involved in the conversation, how does this affect Mexican genealogy when it comes to, you know, different people of color groups? I mean, you know, this is something I always bring up because it was one of the most shocking things that I had ever heard about, you know, Veracruz and that whole region of Mexico. And I was like, what? The people look like me, you know, like, I was like, wow. But, you know, just to fold that into the conversation, I mean, you know, this is a topic people naturally think Spanish speaking countries, oh, they don't have any connection to any other people of color groups.
No, Mexico is as diverse as the United States is, with different races and ethnicities. And when I do a lot with DNA, and I'm very involved with a number of the Mexican and Hispanic groups, Facebook groups that are on for genealogy, and people will test their autosomal DNA and they're confused. It doesn't show up as Mexican. I know I'm Mexican. My parents were Mexican. Well, you know, Mexican is not a race.
Right.
And,
well, it's a conflation of the nation state with identity. It doesn't fit.
No, and Mexicans are, I mean, just the definition of Mexican alone is you know, mestizo and a mixed race. And so you have to explain to them, you have to look at, you know, the history, the migration patterns, but it can be a mix. Mexicans they're European, they're indigenous, they're African, they're Asian. There's sizable Chinese and Japanese populations in Mexico because of the Spanish galleons. I mean, there was a lot of movement between the Philippines. There's a lot of Jewish ancestry in there. And so it's really quite a mix. And people get very confused with those ethnicity estimates. And I'm sure we'll talk about the caste system that existed in the Spanish Empire, but you know, the records can tell you quite a bit about the mixes that existed in Mexico.
Well, it does to a point, and then there's a suppression of identities, and then what they do is they collapse the categories. And they'd make Native people like literally brown. So then, you know, so that whatever mixed or whatever is in there, you don't really know. They're just these designations, and it's stratified society.
And like with Afro-Mexicans, Black Mexicans, it's, I just pulled up the figure here. Let's see, because the 2020 National Census in Mexico will be the first time that Black Mexicans are counted as such on their national census. Mexico was one of 2 Latin American countries that still does not count them. And they're currently 1.2% of the population in Mexico based on the latest population survey in 2015.
Colleen, I have a question.
Sure.
Because I remember when that announcement was made that they were going to allow them to be identified as, you know, as Afro-Mexicanos. But my question was, and what you were just saying, does that mean that up until this time they were never at all, or does that mean that they were enumerated but simply as Mexicanos? What
I don't know how they were enumerated, but it is my understanding they were enumerated.
Okay.
They were counted, but I don't know how they were. I don't know how they were classified. I mean, we run into that in U.S. censuses. When you go back based on how the U.S. Census Bureau was collecting the information. I mean, we know we have, I mean, so many of my Mexican ancestors were counted as white, which is the race, if they were predominantly European. But just like we have here, people were counted, but they weren't they weren't correctly they weren't correctly counted.
I know.
So I
in
don't know.
Texas,
I'll
many
have to
people-
find out.
Yeah.
I'll have to find out, Angela.
There's a really wonderful
Okay, I was
book that
curious.
I found in Spanish. The link on the side. It's called Afrodescendientes en Mexico, una historia de silencio y discriminación. It's a 150-page book with full of maps, beautiful graphics, and it really it speaks to a lot of this. Even though it's in Spanish, don't let that dissuade you. Start to look at the books. Start to look at things in Spanish, look at the maps and get an idea of what's in there. And then get a word list, you know?
Yep.
The word list is probably your biggest help with a lot of this.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be looking for the same things over and over and over again, you know?
So let's talk about, because you all reference like a caste system, and, you know, that's a term that Americans are like, kind of scares them. Caste system, what do you mean? Even though that's
Even though.
Exactly.
The unofficial system.
Exactly, which is in full force here. We'll get to that later in current events. But let's talk about the caste system. I know Ellen sent me a document that I really think we need to show, because I imagine that folks probably just don't even realize that this is a possibility. There's some conversations over in the chat. People are like, I have, you know, Puerto Rican or Mexican DNA matches, and I want to, you know, how do I make the bridge to find out who these people are? Ellen, I'm gonna share my screen so you can kind of talk about what this is. But I think this is something we definitely need to talk about, because it references the system, the caste system.
Okay, well, the Caste system that we were bringing up before, it's a system of paintings that was used they were created in Spain, or they could be created in Mexico, and they were imported to different parts of the empire. And basically what you had was literally all of these racial mixtures, and what would come out if these two people got together. And they're like little genre paintings next to each other. And in Puerto Rico, this wasn't really used. It was because really, frankly, Puerto Rico was a backwater. Its economy was based in smuggling until the 17th century, when Spain started to pick up again. And now what we're looking at on the screen is actually a document from 1872. It's actually it's a slave certificate. And it's from the Registro de Esclavos. I was able to see this also. This is the original certificate. In 1873 was when abolition came to Puerto Rico, what is known as abolition. So this is actually gives us a lot of information about the individual, which is sadly a 12-year-old girl. On the left-hand side, we have description of her appearance. And even though this is talking about kind of this mass breeding of a population in Puerto Rico, you still have details here that can help you, you know, even identify family tendencies. Since this girl is only 12 in 1782, I believe I found her in the civil registration, which begins in 1885, just a decade. I'm mathlexic. Just a short time later.
That's a real thing. It is a real thing.
It is a real thing. I need a calculator to add two numbers, but that's okay. I have a doctorate, so don't worry.
Come on now, exactly.
Okay.
You can still achieve.
But you can cross-reference these items with this. The thing with slavery in Puerto Rico is that you have clues when you start to see people turn up in documents with one surname and not two surnames, because a lot of people are forced into the service industry, and double names are kind of a system of inheritance, and they're basically saying that you only have one side, and if you follow your mother's side along the law, you just like stateside, your condition followed the condition of the mother. So in 1873, when these documents are issued, each slaveholder was indemnified. Okay, so the person got the equivalent of about $580 for this kid, okay, on the basis of this certificate. Did this kid get anything for her life, to build her life after slavery? No, these people were usually left stuck working as servants and working in service industries, which was rife everywhere because you needed people to care for your children, wash your clothes, cook your food. And that's where we find a lot of people moving, is to like the city centers in Puerto Rico. Is that too much, or is it like, does it make sense?
No, I think it does.
Okay.
Do they have similar, because that's the thing. People want to find the bridge. You know what I mean? So you've got the DNA match. They've got their tree going back so far. You've got your tree going back so far. So to me, it seems like documents such as this that list designations or list the caste system are kind of the key to like the bridge.
It is a key.
Yeah.
It is a key.
Yeah, it is. In Mexico, the record types that I'll talk about that are the building block records for doing your family history. They do prior to independence. 1821 with Mexican independence is when the caste system was technically made illegal. But you'll still find racial and ethnic classifications on documents after that. But prior to that, you're definitely going to find them. And they were like with church records, there were usually separate volumes for indigenous and for different castes. So you'll find the European Spanish records in one volume in different volumes for the various different levels of the hierarchy. And you'll find the descriptions in there, but the descriptions would change over time because you could buy whiteness and be classified different.
Wait, hold on. I want you to repeat that. I want to make sure you run that back. She said you could buy whiteness.
Yes, you could buy whiteness. Ellen hopefully can give us the actual term. I'm not even going to attempt. I don't speak Spanish, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it. And this is a new area that I'm researching. But yes, it was basically, a permission from the king to be classified differently, and that affected your social, legal, and economic status.
I just want you to know that the chat room is lighting up. That's why I made it.
They're calling piezas de sangre.
Yes, that's
the cleansing of the blood.
Yes.
So then what they wanted to make sure is that you didn't have any Jewish ancestry, you didn't have any Muslim ancestry, you didn't have any Black ancestry.
Yes, okay. Black and Jews that was definitely the biggest hotspot, especially during the Inquisition. So yes, you could change the classification. And there's a good book by John Schmal, Schmal, and he has 2 books out, and I can post some links later, but he has one that's specifically for tracing your indigenous Mexican ancestry. And he talks about that quite a bit, the fluidity of the caste description. Someone would move to a different area, and if they were lighter skinned, we have that with descendants of slaves. I mean, if you were based on your skin color, you could pass for something different, or it was how the priest thought you looked is how they recorded you in the baptisms.
And so
okay, chat room is lighting up because they're like, what? Can you buy places? People want to scared. But the biggest question is, it was basically the same system as it was here in the United States. If you had one drop of any of that, whether you were Jewish, whether you were Muslim, or whether you were of African descent, like there was no way you could have the cleansing done.
No. The thing was, the paperwork got changed. You didn't get changed. The paperwork got changed. So now you could get married.
Yes.
But this is reserved for people adinerado. Everything was a fee with the Catholic Church. So you had to pay fees. So the people who would do this would tend to be, say, the illegitimate son of a plantation owner who wants to marry somebody who's basically considered blanca, and then the parents would say, well, I don't think this guy is like, forget it. And then they go like, oh, wait, they go to the church, or they go through this massive application process with, I don't know how much that costs in the end. And then in the end, in the Spanish records, this person would now be regarded as white, effectively changing their social status and enabling them a level of social mobility. And also know that for women could never, even if they're considered white, they would never be first class. Siempre era tercer clase. You were always third class. Women could own property. They could run a will. They could run a business. But in terms of the system, you still have this kind of built-in machismo structure where when men were at the top, men held the cards ultimately. A really great academic who writes about this stuff is called MARIAH Carmen de Baerga, and she wrote an incredible article, and it's got a great title. It's called Cuando el amor no basta, when love isn't enough. And it goes through these different case studies of these relationships and then how these people are either rejected or accepted by these different families.
So it was money only, honey.
Honey,
yeah. The chat room is everybody has no edges left. We have not even hit like the biggest part of the topic, but this is a very important conversation though, you all, because that's the thing. If people are trying to find that bridge between, their known ancestors here or who they've reached back to, and, these matches that they may have that may be, that may be Latin, it's a possibility that somebody may have paid or been able to afford to pay for this.
Yes.
And that's the reason why you're not making the tie, and that you may not even necessarily know to look at records in that were based upon caste systems to check for particular names. But were names changed too, or was it just the racial designation?
Names can change. I mean, there in Puerto Rico there is a fluidity of name, and I'm talking about Puerto Rico because that's where the bulk of my own research has been, and I've done some research in other places, but most of my examples are going to be from Puerto Rico. I don't know. I just lost my train of thought. It's Puerto Rico, and it just went pop.
Name changes.
So, yeah, name changes. You can even see this in the census. Some people will be, once they remarry, everybody in the family's name is changed. The surnames are completely changed. I've seen this with families go through 2 or 3 times name changes because the wife, like the person, your partner dies, and if you have a child, it's usually a pajanda, a little group of kids. You're not going to take those kids up yourself. You're going to go out right away and you're going to try to get remarried as fast as you can. And usually in Puerto Rico, it tended to be cousins because you went around to the people that were closest to you. So you have a lot of endogamy as well.
Yeah.
So then you'll have the name repeat also.
So, wow. So basically, I mean, everybody in the chat room is still floored, but Shelley brings up a very important point, is that even despite the cleansing, right? And the fact that maybe names may get changed because, of a new marriage or whatever, the DNA is not going to lie. So that is going to potentially confirm or reject what people, this could
There's
be
also a really disturbing part too, Nika, in that what some people have discovered is that there are priests in Puerto Rico who would inseminate slave women and then sell the children. And they're finding that they're all tracing back to this one guy, which is kind of a scenario that we have seen, like stateside. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. So there is a lot in there.
So let's talk about names, because part of me is like 2018. We need y'all to come back and just talk about this whole thing, because I've never heard of this. I'm pretty sure everybody isn't. I'm going to be referring everybody to watch this, especially if you have DNA matches are from Latin countries. But let's talk about naming conventions, because that is huge to this, right? Yeah. Like, I remember I sat in Colleen's session and I was like, oh my God, I feel like I can just beat the world now because I understand this. Let's talk about how names are used in countries that, that have Spanish, just Spanish customs, structure.
Spanish colonies.
Yeah.
It's the dual surname system, and there are variations in different areas and over different times. Like with Mexico, it is still very much in practice. It's a dual surname system. You have your father's paternal surname first, and then your mother's paternal surname second. And in Mexico, women do not traditionally, and even still, there are always exceptions, they don't take their husband's name when they marry. So each person has two surnames, and then their children get the combination of those two surnames. And you will, in some records, see the wife sometimes tack on the husband's surname with the preposition de, of. So, for instance, my paternal surname would be Robledo, and then my mother's paternal surname was Flanagan, and my husband's surname is Green, his paternal surname. So I could be Colleen Robledo Flanagan de Green. But because of those surnames, it makes it much easier. You always have instant clues on how to search for the maternal line. You know, when you're working with non-Hispanic US records, sometimes you can't find that maiden name and you have to search high and low. Mexican genealogy records are often called the best genealogy records in the world. And there's so much information in those records, but having those dual surnames, you will automatically have that paternal surname. And when you have a woman, you know her father's paternal surname. So you get that jump there. But that's how the surname system is in Mexico. And I know there's slight variations in other Latin countries. Mexico, by the way, just did approve. It is legally required to give your child the paternal surname and then the maternal surname. And I can't remember which state in Mexico last year just passed a law that allowed the civil registration with the maternal surname first. So that is starting to change legally, and it's going to be too bad for genealogists, but it gives women an elevated status.
I mean, the naming practices actually, it's in the 19th century when Spain actually passed the law saying that this, because before people would take a surname from wherever you'd get the most clout.
Yeah.
And then you'd have, like, if there's certain lines in Puerto Rico that when you go back to the 16th century, you find that there's like 5 or 6 kids and each kid has a different surname. Yep. Because they knew their genealogy, that family group, and they, they were able to select those names. Even we can't find those ancestors today. Mm-hmm. And then at a certain point, it just got totally out of hand. That said, there are records which have no mother on them. I have seen them in Puerto Rico in a civil registration, and it's usually because the father just decides they're going to cut the mother out for some reason. And it's very sad because you can't, I think maybe when the person dies, if you find additional cross-referencing other records to try to find out, well, who gave birth to this kid? And so there's stuff like that. Renata, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that most of you know I just retired from 32 years of teaching, and for the last 7 or 8 years I've taught the ESL kids for my grade level, and I've been noticing a pattern that's been happening, which is that when these kids are registering, they're coming in from Latino countries and they're coming in from Puerto Rico. The registrars are now not inputting their dual surnames into the system. And I have fought that every step of the way because I don't want the kids to lose their identity and culture and whatnot. But if anybody's listening who, has young kids in the school system, I suggest that you check and make sure that the way you wrote their name on the registration form is the way that it's being recorded. Because they're, especially when they come in very young, they're learning from us, from their teachers, what their name is. And unless they got lucky and got Miss Sanders, they're not, writing their dual names, and they're losing them. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up. I've seen that trend over the last few years.
And that historically, that's been true of Mexican immigrants once they come to the U.S. You'll find on U.S.-Mexico border records frequently. If you're looking for your ancestor under that paternal surname and not finding them, look under just the maternal surname. Most of my ancestors and relatives that came over in the 20th century during the Revolution were recorded on the border entry records under just their maternal surname. Because think about the forms. You have those government forms, and when someone gives their dual surname, it sounds like that dual surname, that first surname might be a middle name. We we tend to think it's that final name that's the surname, and so that's what goes in the surname field. So you have to look under all of those variations, both surnames, just the paternal or just the maternal.
To me, it sounds like something that mirrors like what happens when you identify a former slaveholder of your ancestors, and the surname, that your family ended up going with, even to now is one name, but then before that time period, or maybe even during Reconstruction, they may have been known by maybe the first slaveholder they may have had, or maybe the last one, which is a different name than the name they had, which maybe was the name that the mother was enslaved by. So you have to look at three different types of variations. There's some questions that Angela is asking that are really good and relevant that I think we should talk about. But there are some questions in the chat room I wanted to make sure that I got to, because they are just flying over here. Shelly had a great question. She wanted to know what's really the root of the naming patterns. Is it linking to the cleansing, but more as in keeping folks in the family?
Well, I should talk about, well, there's patronymic names, and then there's names by association. You have different sources for surnames at different time periods. Like, for instance, people talk about the first Sotomayor in Puerto Rico, but actually he went to a naming ceremony with the chief, and the other guy got his name. So that meant you had two guys with that surname running around, not one. And then you could, if you look at, like, for instance, the 1900 U.S. draft records, there are Sotos who are Indians, and they list on their draft cards, World War I draft cards, that they're native. So I mean, I can't think that there isn't some kind of connection there to these other naming practices and stuff, but that's older. The other thing too is that people are sticking names in and changing names when they come over and go into the service during the 1940s, like my dad, whose tombstone now says Johnny. My dad he didn't use Johnny after he was in his 20s. He was known as John because people didn't want to say it. People couldn't pronounce Orlando.
Well, my grandmother, when she came over in the 1940s, her name is MARIAH Noboa. And you want to talk about endogamy?
Oh yeah.
Her mother was married to her uncle. Okay, that's endogamy, incest. Okay, but when she came here, she changed her name to May, and then she remarried a Colombian, and she died under the name of May Banda. Wow. So if I didn't know that information,
right,
I wouldn't have been able to track her down, because she died under May Banda, not MARIAH Noboa.
Oh my Lord!
But that's why you have to talk to your elders and find out where they were at, and like what did they do, and that they get stuck in a country, and did something happen to them, and a lot of times you'll find glimmers of things that then will give you hints, so that then you can connect that to other stuff later.
I was going to say, Ellen, can you quickly say something about dispensations, because in the chat room they're picking it.
Oh, well, dispensas were documents that enabled people to marry each other. It basically told the church that it didn't matter that you're marrying your cousin, your uncle, your aunt, and then your in-law. Yeah, because they have them by what is it called? Ascendencia. Then one is by marriage. You know, you could get a dispensation, say, like if you married if your husband married like his sister-in-law, which happened a lot too. I have seen marriages. There's a Quiñones in, what was it, in San Germán, I think it was. She wound up marrying her uncle, and then when he died, marrying her father's other brother. And, you know, so you have all of these relationships, but really what they are, you have to also remember, romance and love, man, that's like a 19th century thing. It really grows in the 18th century. These are about business connections, right? Mostly. And this is about keeping property in the family and keeping a plantation going and not letting all of that go, you know, out away from the family. That's
I was going to also add here in the chat room, I let people know, I have 5 fourth great aunts and uncles who married 5 siblings in the same family.
Well,
I cannot tell you, and it was to preserve property and land.
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
Do you know how many Ruiz Santiago, Santiago Ruiz they are, and then their descendants married. So the Ruiz Santiago, Santiago Ruiz line married, like all their children married into the Charneco Caban line.
Right. And that's where I connect to her, to the Caban line.
Yeah.
And you go back and you see this, and it's a genealogical nightmare trying to, when you consider, I have cousins. I'm related to her like at least 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, I'm tracing one line right now that I've traced 6 intermarriages.
Oh my God.
And that's just within a couple generations. But, you know, we have that even in some of the U.S. families. My husband's lines are old colonial. It's just you don't have the documentation and you don't have the dual surnames that can often help provide a clue.
The other thing is that since dispensas cost money, at a certain point when the civil registration turned up in 1885, in every country it's a different date, but that enabled people to bypass the church, and that enabled people to then lie on, you'll see the read the document, you'll know, if you've done enough research, you'll know these people are related, and then you'll go like, but wait a second, they just took the oath saying that they're not related, you know, and you'll see it in there. Yeah. So I mean, there's you can still have these relationships, but it could take you older documentation to find it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that makes autosomal DNA research very challenging when you're working with these areas. Mexican autosomal DNA, New Mexican autosomal DNA can be very challenging because of the endogamy.
And I was gonna also throw out here too, this is where you can't skate in genealogy. That's the term we use as Greeks, is like you can't like get through the process of like not having like not having gone through something. With it sounds to me, you know, this is the same thing as slavery era research. You just can't just take anything that is just flung at you. You know what I mean? Like you have to be able to prove without a shadow of a doubt and have enough evidence behind your statements. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing down a family. It's not really your family.
Yes.
And so I let's talk about documents and critical record sets. Angela asked some really great questions about the census. We talked about civil registrations. Of course, those take place throughout the year because they're civil registrations. You can't say, hey, every woman, have a baby on this 10th year. And so what are with civil registrations? We're talking the sacraments of the church, right? We're talking marriages.
No, it's civil. It's civil. It's civil.
Okay, it's civil.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the government. It's you, like our U.S. vital records. It's BMDs, and they're registered by the government.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's birth records, right? Marriage and death. Okay. And then we also have censuses. So what do we have in terms of let's talk about what's available online and then what's not available online when it comes to at least these two populations.
Well, with Mexico, only the 1930 national census is fully online. You'll find little tiny bits here and there from other national censuses. Federal censuses is the correct word, but they're not completely online yet. And it's usually been like a project, whether it was an academic project or a society or community went down and might have digitized just a part of it. So 1930 is the only one that is fully online, that is a government conducted census. You'll also get church parish censuses, the padrones, and those are going to be in the church record collections. And that's a census conducted by the church of the members, the families in the parish. And those, the majority of those that still exist are digitized online. They are not indexed, but they're on Family Search. So if you can find the parish, you may be able to find the padrones. I happen to, where the little tiny rancho in Mexico that the majority of my ancestors have lived in for 300 years, there's hardly any padrones available online. But other parishes that I research for other people, I can find theirs online.
Yeah, I think it's really important that people know that local history is your friend. You really have to look on a local level once you're narrowed down that area. And for instance, in Puerto Rico, you have over 70 municipalities and each one has its own history. Dominican Republic has like 69 different municipalities. So you really need to know where to look for. And then once you know the country and once you know that you've got a time period, then you can like start to think about these kind of censuses and these record sets. And sadly, not everything is online. And there are some countries that are really kind of just gaps, like Cuba, for instance. Yeah. There's not much on Cuba. And there isn't much on the Dominican Republic. Has a Institute of Genealogy. I was looking on their site today. Unfortunately, they had listings of articles, but the articles links were busted. But some of those you could actually pick up on other databases. Puerto Rico has censuses. They're municipal record sets also for each municipality, and underneath that you can find censuses. Yeah. But also, because we are talking about the Caribbean bases and basin and the way that we have seen this weather recently, you can understand why we have these things called, like if you're doing Puerto Rican research and you're doing the 19th century, between the late 18th century and the early 19th century, we have this thing called el hueco, which is the hole, which is like you find all your ways around the hueco because, oh, this parish doesn't have the extant records, like Aguada, which is like one of the oldest subdivided parts of Puerto Rico from the 16th century. Their record sets only start in 1821, okay? So then where do you go? You gotta go to military records, you gotta go to other record sets. And we can get more into that because really, the big takeaway for me, know how to read the civil registration, know how to use a census, get through the immigration records, exhaust everything you can online, then we can talk about like 18th century church records, or we can talk about the finer points of, like paleography, what resources do you have and things like that, because you really got to get the basics down.
Yeah, and with Mexico, really a considerable number of their collections are online.
Exactly.
They're digitized, but the majority of the church records, so the three building block records, when I do my intro classes, are the church parish records. There are diocese level ones, but really when you're just starting, you need to focus on the parish, the civil registrations, and then that 1930 census, because the largest wave of Mexican immigration was during the Mexican Revolution, and you still see a lot of family members left there. But you have to identify that hometown first. So there's one intro class that I do often at conferences, and the entire thing is identifying that hometown, because the digitized records that are online are organized according to the current state and then municipality, county, municipio, and the locality. And so you've got to know where those records, where that place is now in the administrative and ecclesiastical structure. And if you don't know the hometown, it's really a needle in the haystack. Because I tried for decades searching for Maria Nieto anywhere in the state of San Luis Potosí. Good luck on that one. So yeah, those building block records, and with the Mexico ones, the parish records, they go back. Let's see, what was my note?
Well, you have some of the oldest there. We have San Juan's have some of the oldest, but then you've got big gaps after. Is the problem.
Yeah, Mexico, the parish records, the majority prior to 1640 are lost, and there's less than 100 parishes that still have records prior to 1600 altogether. So you're really looking at 1640 after is when you're going to find the bulk of the records, but that doesn't mean some parishes, they still exist. And those are all digitized on Family Search, but it's just the tip of the iceberg that has been indexed on those records. So you can go in and get to them online. But it's going old school like you do with microfilm. You're grabbing reels and you're browsing to find where they're located.
Okay, so the basic gist of this is, don't go willy-nilly like you would in the United States, just throwing a name in and hoping that it's going to show up in Carroll County, North Carolina. You're going to find Renata Yarbrough. You cannot do that with these records because of just the names being reused over and over again. you know, even within the same municipalities, and the fact that you really have to have your research down in sound, meaning you've got other identifying things like birth dates, you've got those other civil registrations that confirm collateral research to add the flesh on the bones. This is not just your everyday run of the mill. Like, this is, you're going to get hazed with Latin research. That's what it feels like for me.
mean, you can even use a telephone directory for Manhattan, and you can imagine the fun I have with a surname like Fernandez. This is why I worked on my mother's side of the family, because she's a Babylonia, and it's a lot easier to go like, oh man, I found it, you know. But Fernandez, it was like they were two Ramon Fernandez, which I in the Bronx, in those blocks away from each other, and they were not related. One was my grandfather, and the other was some other guy. I don't know. You know, so unless you, that's why you really need to know, like, well, where did you live? Where did you go to work? How did you get here? Yes. You know?
And we talked about surnames in the naming convention, but not given names.
Right.
And you have to know the given names as well, the compound names, because how many Maria Nietos are there? You know, my great grandmother, she chose to go by her saint name, Maria, instead of her second name, which is the traditional name that a lot of people stick with. So you have to know both names, because you have to build out these entire family groups and make sure you're pulling the right Maria Nieto.
Let me tell you also that Maria could be Maria de los Dolores, Maria de las Nieves, Maria de los Blancas, Maria de los whatever, you know.
I just pulled up one today that has 4 given names.
Right.
So you have to use all those different clues, but those are awesome clues to help you start really identifying which is the correct person that you're going after.
It's so funny that you should say that, because the 5 fourth grade aunts and uncles, Maria Sebastiana, her twin sister, Maria Francesca, Maria, you know, it just goes on. They're all Marias.
Yes.
But you can also use those names to hone in on a specific birth date, because there's saints names, days.
Yeah.
And for the record, don't try and come looking for me in New York City. You're not gonna find me. I can't tell you. Or you won't find my sister Maria Vega. Okay, it ain't happening.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. We talked about online, but there are a lot of Mexico census records that are microfilmed. I shouldn't say a lot, because there weren't a lot of federal censuses that were taken, but there's much more available on microfilm. And even though my research is on Mexico, I have a Hispanic research email newsletter that I send out. So I'm always looking at what collections come available for the other Latin American countries. You have to go into the catalogs. You can't do the global historical searches. You have to go into the catalogs on Family Search and Ancestry, because Ancestry uses their API to now pull all those indexed records from Family Search. But you punch in the country name, Argentina, Chile, Ecuador. Every single month they are putting more indexes online and more digitized records. But still, a lot of them are accessible on microfilm. So, you know, you go into the Family History Library for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, and unfortunately in this day and time, considering the date that we're at, you know, Family Search cut off circulation of microfilm at the beginning of this month. So they're no longer going to be circulating some of those things. So you may go into the catalog on their website and see, oh, they have, you know, this film, but it's no longer in circulation. So you've got a couple of different options. The first is to just wait to see when they're actually going to digitize it, since they expect to be done by 2020. The second option is to see perhaps maybe if there's a local copy at your local Family Search library. Sometimes they have those permanent copies there because so many people have requested that film. The third option, and you get 5 chances to do this, is to request for them to move that roll of microfilm up in the scanning process. Those are really the only options we have now in terms of circulation, in you know, with, of course, the exception being going to Salt Lake City to actually go and view the microfilm yourself. So I just wanted to make sure that people know that. So if they go on the card catalog and they're like, why can't I click the link to order? It's because they removed them from circulation in that manner. Shelley asked a great question. Military records, are they a good resource for Latin research in the United States?
I have used those for Mexico. I don't find them digitized online. There's very little that I have found. I save that for my Salt Lake City trip and pull it up on microfilm or some of the monographs they have.
The Sociedad Puertorriqueña de Genealogía did a 1817 transcription of the militias across the island, which can be really helpful. And you can see in some cases they actually list the retirees, so you know the person is over 60 years old, and that actually can help. But the problem comes with there's a tendency to only have single surnames in military records, and then militia records, the local militia, which is more likely that I think that if we're talking about people of color in a given area, those records are not going to be duplicated in Spain. The ones that are duplicated, like in Simancas and Segovia, those are going to be the higher up people who had served as officers, because the way that the society was stratified was like criollos, anybody, it was centered to periphery. Anybody born on the island, you're at the bottom. If you're peninsulare, you had more status, and the people with the most status came from the home country, which was Spain. So
I want to interject here. Ellen raised a good issue, and someone in the chat room did as well. Another great source thanks to Ellen, are local history.
Oh, yes.
I'm now looking at this book, The Foundations of the Pueblo of Lares, for information on my, I think third or fourth grade grandfather. Ellen will tell you, these old books are gold mines, but you have to get the actual book because there's no index for this book. So literally, Ellen had shared with me his death record, and I have the book, and I'm like, oh, I'm finding out a lot more information.
Yes.
And and some of my cousins on Ancestry were like, we heard Pedro Jose Lara Escalante was the mayor of San Sebastian. We heard. Now I'm reading this and it's like, yeah, dude, it's legit, you know? And I've been at a loss to find out more information on his wife, who's my third great grandmother. But here, one of the other founders, I think I have a clue, because this person, we know her mother's surname was Lopez de Victoria. I have cousins who were Lopez de Victoria y Segarra, and it looks like that might be the clue, because they mentioned one of the founders as being from Añasco. So don't consider looking for these old books.
Yes, exactly. I just helped someone with a research question yesterday on looking for local histories for Mexico, and Hati Trust and Google Books and Family Searches digitized book collection. I can't even, I mean, I disappear forever on Hati Trust just with Mexico monographs, local histories, and trade publications for the different industries down there.
Right. I also wanted to add the Internet Archive has a repository of some really surprising stuff in there regarding Puerto Rico as well. COINTELPRO records, which if you have family members who are under surveillance, those are genealogical records. You can look at those online or request them from the FBI if you wanted, if you know they're out there, you know.
That room is buzzing. And I'm trying to keep up with all of these. I'm going to make sure I put Hati Trust, because somebody was like, what is that? And let me just let you know, if you don't know about it, you're going to get lost tonight. We're going to keep you up all night long.
And you can do full text searching within those monographs for your surnames, your place names.
Yes.
Things will come up on Google Books as well, and there are some books on Puerto Rican history that are already online. I believe this is one of the first studies of slavery in Puerto Rico, which has some paternalistic overtones at times, but it has a lot of information, and it's the Historia de la Esclavitud Negra en Puerto Rico by Luis M. Diaz Soler, but it's from 1946, and it's gone through a series of editions. And then there's David M. Stark did a book recently called Slave Families in the Hato Economy, because before you have plantations, you have hatos, and they're run very differently than the plantation economy later on.
There's a question in the chat room. Gerald Lopez asked, I'm laughing at the comment. Somebody said, "Who needs sleep?" Because I put in Hathi Trust, so they're not going to go to sleep. Because you're not. That website is mine. Shout out to Judy Russell because she's the one who initially told me about it. Gerald Lopez asked, Colleen, have you ever heard the surname May or Mais in Mexico? Saw a couple in Mexico. Adding to the importance of the book, I found my 4th grade grandfather, Pedro Mais, came from France to the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Royal decree.
I haven't seen that surname. I mean, I research my surnames and then those that I'm helping. But again, yes, the surnames. Well, I have a joke. I'm a part of the Genealogical Society of Hispanic America. And when I do speak and I'm teaching a Hispanic class, I do also include my maiden name, Robledo, and explain, because Colleen Green, you don't get more Irish. Well, yeah, you do. My mom's name's Flanagan. But, they wonder, and I was just informed, someone told me about the Green surname in Baja, Mexico. So again, it's such a diverse country. You can't, the surname variety is extensive as well. You'll find Anglo and French, German, Asian surnames. So I'm never surprised by what surnames we find searching in Mexico.
Oh, I wanted to mention that, people also need to think about like the wars of revolution. And it starts in the 1820s, and that sweeps up from South America, through Mexico, through the Caribbean, and all of these things puts tons of people into movement, and they circulate around the islands, or circulate, and they wind up in all different kinds of places.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was also gonna add, because there were some conversations being had in the group or the chat room about the Mobile, Alabama, Biloxi, New Orleans, the fact that when we're talking about the populations that we've been talking about tonight, you have to also think about the fact that the Spanish
were here.
Were here in the United States, and that those areas were under Spanish control.
Yes.
And so that also means that when you get back to a certain, time period, the records are going to be organized in the same way as they would be, as you all are referring to. And I also will say too, Angela brought up something which is a great point. She says that 1870, the people of Coahuila province in northern Mexico moved to Fort Clark, Texas. The men formed the bulk of the Seminole Indian Scouts, and their records are in the U.S. military. Most of them were Afro-Mexicanos. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of overlap in a lot of different areas.
There was, with Mexico, there has been so much fluidity. You're going to find families that still move back and forth, especially when you get into things like, the forced repatriation in the 1920s. In early 30s, and then the Bracero program. But yes, I love when I teach at a genealogy conference, because I don't want to forget that too. When we talked about similarities with people of color, let's talk how few sessions are offered at conferences.
Oh, Lord.
But
that's a whole
I love when we
get us started.
Talk and I explain Santa Fe was founded before Jamestown was founded. Yes, the Spanish were here very early, and really Henrietta Martinez Christmas, who is the president of the New Mexico Genealogical Society, she is really probably the authority in the country if you are studying colonial Spain in the U.S. She is phenomenal. And those records are not going to be in Mexico. Those records, when you're talking the U.S. colonies here, they are in the States is where you need to look for them. So with New Mexico, there are considerable records that they have available in New Mexico, and same with Texas. You're going to be looking at the universities there, the Texas State Archives, the Behar Archives. California, it's the Huntington Library. If you have early Spanish colonial ancestors in California, you want to hop on the early Californian site on the Huntington Library. And you're going to find, like we talked about military records, they were doing presidio censuses in the U.S. So a lot of them are scattered. They're not in one nice, neat place like on Family Search or Ancestry, although quite a bit of them are, like the old land grant records. Spanish and Mexican land grants, you can find some records for those on Ancestry. So
Bancroft at UC Berkeley has a tremendous collection of early Mexican and also early Puerto Rican items as well.
They do. They haven't digitized much, but they have a lot there.
So some of these, of course, as usual, you can't do everything from the comforts of your chair. We had a question about Cuba. Someone asked, they have a maternal grandmother that is Cuban. We alluded to Cuba a little bit earlier. You said something about
there's not a lot of record sets to go on. There's Cuba GenWeb, which has some records on it and some transcriptions, but then the thing is to see what kind of work people have done on the names, you know.
And Vanderbilt University is going in and digitizing a lot of those records right now.
Well, that's the 18th century, after the 18th century church records, because they have a lot produced there.
Yeah, there were all kinds of, there were a number of press releases that went out earlier this year. In fact, I think I sent it to you, Nika. We got really excited talking about it, but it's Vanderbilt's team that's going in there and doing it. Also the Cuban, I won't get their name right. It's their Genealogical Society on their Facebook page. They just scanned and posted, it's not indexed, but they posted some slave plantation records that they got from, I can't remember which university in Florida. And you're going to want to look at some of the Florida universities there too. But the Vanderbilt one's going to be the really exciting one to see come about.
Miami, I think at the University of Miami, the University of South Florida, they have, there's a big overlap in the newspapers that they have. They have Caribbean newspapers. And they have, and it also overlaps with the Library of Congress website too. You know,
Any last thoughts before we move on? Because this was a loaded topic. We already know next year we're gonna have to cover this again because there's gonna have to be a part 2 and a part 3.
And just want to mention, you know, Indians were taken from New Spain and sold in the Caribbean, so then that could be also some of the reason that we have this kind of variety that we're seeing in DNA today.
Yes, if you're into DNA, if you're not following Blaine Bettinger's blog, you should. But he actually has a Hispanic tie to his maternal name, his mother's name. It's Canary Islanders, and read some of his stuff that he's been writing about the mitochondrial DNA with that Canary Islanders name and how he's starting to trace that line. And again, it's that continued fluidity from South America back to the Caribbean. I mean, it was going both ways. So
I would also like to interject that in the chat room we have some of our cousins and fellow Latino bloggers. And again, I have a whole list of Latino and Caribbean bloggers, some of whom in the chat room are on my site. Definitely check out these bloggers. They have extensive experience. They also offer a great amount of links to other records and places that are genealogically relevant to people of Latino descent. I just want to throw that out there. And
absolutely.
Thank you for being there. Anissa and Gerald, thank you for representing. Hello to my cousins, Rebecca and Miguel.
I was just about to say that was going to be my next point was to say thank you all so much for the support tonight. That's another reason why I wanted to make sure that we did this show, that we covered this topic, was because, as Colleen mentioned, when we're going to conferences and different events, there are so few.
It is,
there's not
in conferences that are held in, you know, areas with large Hispanic populations, and I'm a squeaky wheel. And anytime I speak at a conference or a society or seminar, I tell the people, you have to complain. You have to, if you're at these conferences on the feedback forums, you have to ask for more classes and not just say Hispanic. If you're looking
Come on now.
No.
Latino. Well, it's, you know, if you're looking for Cuban, if you're looking for Mexican, you have to ask for those specific ones and keep asking. And I do want to give a shout out to 2 conferences because there are so few. And Texas State, we had to cancel. I was on their board. We had to cancel the conference this year because our venue was in Houston and it's too damaged. But Texas State Genealogical Society is the only non-Hispanic specific society that offers a Hispanic track every single year. Angela was going to speak there as well this year, so was I. And so they specifically went out and looked for speakers. They recognized their demographic. And Ohio Genealogical Society is going to offer a Hispanic track at their conference next year in April. And they also specifically reached out. I'm doing 2 sessions there. So we have to be squeaky wheels. Yes. Yeah, and we're not the only ones. If you have Asian ancestry, there's even less offered for you.
Come on now.
We're not at the bottom, on the priority list, but we have to make noise, and we have to ask for these things. We have to be willing to learn and step up and teach. Okay, I'm off my soapbox, Nika. Sorry.
No, everything you said is 100% right. I think, and that, like I said, that's the reason why I wanted to make sure that, this year, on BlackProGen Live, people probably are like, why are you all talking about Asian research? Why are you talking about Latin research? Because we've had shows on both of these topics and how they're intertwined with people of color research, in particular, the African diaspora. And we spent an hour and 20 minutes tonight talking about all of the overlap and connections. And, it just goes to the point, really, and this is a great wrap up before we get into Ask Mariah. You can't operate on an island on your own. You know what I mean? And as people of color, it doesn't matter who we are, we have to learn how to research in different populations and in different locations, because especially with DNA, with the stuff that's coming out in our DNA results in terms of our relations, you have to be able to navigate through these systems. And, to me, I think, and I can say pretty solidly that someone who's doing research on Latin populations primarily, they have all the skills they need to find enslaved populations in the United States. Really, truly, I mean, I can say that I'm just going to go ahead and say that, because you can't just go on whatever you fling to a wall to see if it sticks. You've got to have all those details together, and you've got to be able to, realize that all the records are not online. You've got to go to repositories. You've got to go back to microfilm. You've got to look at local histories. It's the exact same principles. So I almost feel like I want to challenge everybody. Yes, I'm giving you homework tonight. Look through your DNA results. Look for Latin countries as a birthplace, especially if you're on Ancestry DNA. Just see what's out there. Look for Dominican Republic. Look for Cuba. Look for Barbuda, which of course we send our love to them because their entire island has been completely destroyed by the recent storms. Look for Puerto Rico. Look for Mexico, right? Just see if you can look at that person's tree or your DNA matches tree and see if you can try to find the bridge, and reach out, extend an olive branch to that cousin to see if you can find that information. Because I imagine, there's so much overlap. I would love to see collaborative projects being done between people who focus primarily on Latin research and folks who focus primarily on African American research. And it can be done from the other groups as well. So I definitely want to challenge everybody to do that tonight. And if you don't have any matches, try to find somebody on a U.S. Census that was born in one of these countries and see if you can trace their ancestry back using some of the methods that were discussed tonight with regard to civil registrations, with regard to if there are any parish records, censuses, whatever you can find, just to challenge yourself to make sure that your skills are sharpened when it comes to genealogy. Because to me, with the skills you need to research formerly enslaved people and the research skills that you need to research people of Latin descent, you have to be an excellent researcher to do this work. Period, point blank. You just have to. So anyone else with any other questions or final comments? Colleen, feel free. You don't have to stay with this because I know you probably want to go home because we're getting ready to jump into Ask Mariah, which is our viewer submitted question and answer time period. But go ahead, Ellen.
I just think that this also has this tremendous political valence, and it builds connections between us, and we need more connections. The more connections, the better.
You're right. Especially with the current political climate. You ain't never lied. You ain't never lied. All right. And so let's see. I think Angela. I think she's having. Maybe she's fallen asleep. We don't know. She kind of.
No, she's there.
She's there.
She blackened herself, but she put a comment in that said, "I'm interested in seeing more from the Americas represented. I wish an initiative could be launched to do exactly what Nika is suggesting: collaboration between people of color and peoples of color intended." And I think that's a great thing. It's like I said. I mean, why can't there be? So many people are testing through all these companies. You can set up a DNA project on Family Tree DNA. Amongst your matches who you've identified have roots here in the United States versus, roots maybe in Puerto Rico or any of these other countries, and building a huge tree. And then once folks see that they're connected to it, I mean, gosh, I'm telling you, people will latch onto that. People just don't realize they do. They would. All right, let's see. Thank you so much, first of all, to Ellen and to Colleen for your expertise. Also, all of our chatters who joined us, like Anna, who's got her blog, Genealogica Nuestra, who I posted the link in the chat room.
Gerald has his blog.
Gerald has his blog. I don't know the name of
Dominican Roots.
Dominican Roots. That's his blog. Be sure to check them out. Give them some love and let them know that you heard about them here. Of course, like I said, there's no way in an hour and 20 minutes we can get through all the content. I just wanted to do a high level so that people could understand exactly what we were talking about. And Gerald says dominicanroots.blogspot.com. That's his website. And we definitely need a part 2.
Yeah, part 2, definitely.
We definitely need a part 2.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
MARIAH, finally.
This is everybody's favorite part of the episode. Colleen is like, what is this? Why do I see grandmas? So any viewer, if you've ever watched BlackProGen Live, you know that we offer you, the general public, the ability to have your questions, queries, conundrums, brick walls submitted to our panel, and we weigh in to help you get the answer to your research question. As always, I have to remind everybody that the query is never shared with the panelists beforehand, because they don't know how to handle themselves, and they will research it to death. And by the time we get on air, they'll have all the answers and they'll be like, okay, we don't have to talk about this. So
I'll spit my water out, Nika.
Because it's true.
Ellen's the guilty one.
Ellen's the guilty one. It is true. I have to withhold the information from them every single week, so they have not seen this. Just in case people think we've rehearsed this ahead of time. No, we never do. They never know what it is. So, all right. So here is the question for the evening. It's a very simple one. I am looking to see who my father is.
Okay.
True's face is hilarious. I wish everybody could see it, but right now, I'm presenting to everyone. True's got a ooh face on, and this is from Ona Wright. She is looking to see who her father is, so we're trying to establish who Paul is. FYI, everybody, Tyrone Craft finally made it to the show, and he's excited because he made it for Ask MARIAH, because it's his favorite part. All right, so here is what she knows, and she knows quite a bit. She was told her father's name was Eddie or Edward Wright. He was born in 1924 in Arkansas and died in 2007 in Illinois. His wife's name was Vivian Irving Wright, and she died in 2008. His mother, or her paternal grandmother, was Leela Wright, and she was born about 1909 in Mississippi. Her mother's name was Early May Wright Williams, and she was, this is Ona's mother's name, was Early May Wright Williams, and she was born in 1937 in Arkansas, and she died in 1974 in Chicago. Early's, looks like her mother's name was Parthenia Guest Williams. So we've got a few generations worth of information here. So we've got Edward Wright, born about 1924 in Arkansas, died in 2007 in Illinois. His wife was named Vivian Irving Wright, died in 2008. His mother was Leela Wright, born in 1909 in Mississippi. Then we've got Ona's mother, who was named Early May Wright Williams, born in 1937 in Arkansas, who died in 1974 in Chicago. And Ona's maternal grandmother's name was Parthenia Guest Williams. Now, what she's found, she's got 1940 census for her father. Remember, this is where we're framing the question. Who is Paul? We've got a 1940 census in Chicago, Chicago City Ward. She has also taken a DNA test on Ancestry DNA. Lastly, these are her thoughts that she's also sharing with us. She thought her father had died years before in 1974, but she found out he lived until 2007. You, girl, that's what I said too. She always wondered who he was and what he looked like and why he never spoke to her, even though they lived in the same South Side Chicago area. Yes. She says she didn't know he was alive. Finding more about him will bring her closer, and knowing she did have a father, even though he didn't acknowledge her for whatever reason, she would still like to know him. So she was not aware that he had died before he actually passed away. And I'm just going to go back on camera and let's have a little time with Nika real quick. Because we need it. To me, this is sounding like an outside child situation to me. Or that's how the old folks would refer to it. This sounds like he may have been with his wife in some sort of a relationship, and whether they were married or not, and were conceived. And there's a huge possibility that his wife did not know about you. And considering you all were in the same location, you were on the south side of Chicago, typically that usually indicates, and my mom will kill me. My mom watches this. I can already hear. She will call me if I say it wrong. My mom says that when people migrated to Chicago, the earlier folks migrated to the west. No, they migrated to the south side, and the later people migrated to the west side. In some ways, you can kind of pinpoint when your family got there. Ona doesn't mention when she was born. So it's hard to know whether or not she was conceived in Arkansas, since her mother was born there and her father was born there, and her mother gave birth to her in Chicago. And so that's a little hard to place. With regard to DNA matches, I would suggest to you to test someone from your mother's side of the family. You know, it could be a first cousin, aunt, uncle, anyone you could possibly find who's related to you on your mother's side. The reason why is you want to be able to separate your results out. Right now, you just have results. You want to be able to decipher between who's definitely a match on your mom's side and who's definitely a match on your father's side. The other thing you have to consider here too, we talked a lot about endogamy tonight, or intermarriage or interrelation between people. If both of your parents were from the same community in Arkansas, there is a possibility that far back that they may have been related. That's another reason why you may want, you probably need to test someone on your mother's side, a known relative. I also will add the caveat in with that as well. There's no way to make sure that that relative is really a relative on your mom's side, because they may have an issue of parentage as well. So yeah, I just got to put that out there. Just have to put that out there.
Well,
anything
I took
else?
Care of that, Nika. I'm just
Nika, I'm looking in the chat room because Anice's she found James R. Bush, Phillips, Arkansas on.
Oh, see, wait a minute, hold what you got, because why? See, this ain't nothing but Jesus. Let me tell you, when she said Arkansas, Mississippi, something told me this was the Delta. I just knew it was the Delta. I don't know why I knew. It just spoke to me that it was the Delta, because that's where my family's from. She said Phillips County. I know exactly where that is. Angela knows exactly where that is.
Check the chat room.
Yes, I'm checking the chat room. Yeah, okay, so Bernice is asking, yes, she has found her father on 1940 census. She mentioned that to us. Phillips County, Arkansas is not that far from Mississippi.
He's on the 1930 census too.
Yeah, Yeah, there's several censuses. So the Mississippi birthplace, Phillips was sort of, wasn't it like a magnet area, Angela? People left the more rural locations and moved to Phillips for more opportunities before they then moved to Chicago.
North. That's
Yeah,
right.
before they migrated more north. So that
And many came out of Mississippi and landed in Phillips, and then kept going either to St. Louis or Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I would also, Ona, if you really want to try to find more information about him, because remember, we've got DNA. So DNA would confirm that his identity was what your mother said it was, or what your family has told you that it was. But also, I would look at Chicago Defender. That's a huge resource. See if his name is mentioned in the paper. I'd look for his wife, potential other family members. The other thing about the Chicago Defender is that some libraries carry the historical Black newspapers for ProQuest. You can get that through your local library. Some of them do not. So I would check with your library to see if they have access to it. The other thing I would do is Ancestry does have the death records for a specific time period for the Defender, but it's not the whole newspaper. There is a pay per day or per week or per, however long access to the Chicago Defender archives that you can get online. I think it costs like $10 a day. Search at your heart's content to see if there's any mention of your father in those particular records. Anybody else want to add anything here?
There's a tree on Family Search. I don't know if it's a person who's asking Parthenia Guest Williams, and it has 5 sources, 3 memories, and has her listed as deceased and buried in Mount Vernon Memorial Park Cemetery. But I mean, is it the same person?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Parthenia is not really our issue, because that is on her mother's side. It's
on her mother's
trying
side.
to,
Okay.
yeah, we want Eddie, right?
Okay.
And we want Leela, his mother. Yeah, and I would say, since Leela was born in Mississippi, I would check Delta locations, Greenville, which is Washington County. I'd check Issaquena County, Warren, which is Vicksburg, Tippah. I check all of those potential locations on the Delta, maybe even Bolivar County, which is Mount Bayou. I'd go through all those locations. Port Gibson, I'd check all those locations, because a lot of those folks would go up north. And at least my family, that's what happened. They left northeast Louisiana and moved to Phillips County. And then even some of them left from that area and went into Pine Bluff, before they went to California and other locations. And Ona's mother is not still alive. Shelly's asking in the chat room. She's not. She said her mother passed away. And
because Shelly will want you to build that timeline from 1924, even adding Leela with him,
Yes, she will.
Shelly will want to get at that, about that timeline with what you have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Bernice mentioned checking the Social Security death records as well.
I agree. The Social Security Applications Index is key with this. The thing is, especially when you're trying to find parentage, you got to really dig in your parents' business. That's really what we're doing to establish a timeline. I mean, I've worked with several people who are like, "Who is Paul? I don't know who he is." Or, "I have his name, but the details are not matching up." You got to really trace. You got to know where your mama slept, whose house she came over, where she was living. Go and talk to your nosy cousins to see if they're going to spill the tea on your mama. And I mean, we got to be real. If you really want to find out, you got to get down and dirty with some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And you may not get the answers that you might want to hear about your mother or about your father. You have to be prepared for both of those things.
Question. In the 1930 census and even 40 census, where are there siblings listed in the household with him? Because he would only be about 6 years old in the 1930 census. Were there other siblings? And if so, perhaps if obituaries through whatever source, Genealogy Bank or newspapers.com or wherever can be located, be some sort of a relationship between the siblings. She wants to know details about Eddie, about Edward Wright. well, maybe you can find some of those details through his family.
Mhm.
And so I would try and follow them if she can't follow him. They are still part of a unit. And if there are, I don't know if she's in the chat room or not, but I would
No.
certainly that household in 1930, particularly while he was still a child and dependent on others as a young child, relationship that hopefully may have sustained and been a part of his life throughout his lifetime. So I would strongly recommend that she do that.
I think that's a great suggestion. Also, once you pinpoint where your paternal grandmother was from in Mississippi, look at those educable children's list records. That can help identify
Yes.
those were census that were taken of school-age children in Mississippi. That can help you identify who her family members were as well, and her siblings. And also, we just have to throw this out there. When you get that maternal family member to do the DNA test, you have to be prepared for the fact that he may not be your dad. With the nature of DNA testing and how some of this stuff falls out, there always is a possibility that he may not be your father, and that you would look at your closest matches that don't match you and that maternal cousin and reach out to them, and through repetition. We always talk about repetition with DNA, repetition of surnames, pedigrees, locations, honing down those things and talking to your closest matches that are on that side. You can then drill down who the potential suspect would be if he is indeed not your dad, or it would confirm for you that he is your father. Let's see. Bernice says, look at World War II draft registration. Absolutely. And then, that's the other thing. City directories for Chicago. You can find those. I know that Phillips County, I don't think they have one. If you end up going to Phillips County, Arkansas, there is a genealogical society there. There was one woman who did quite a bit of work with regard to people of color, but their libraries, it's a nice size little library, but they do not have a lot for African-American records. I'll just put that out there because I've been there. Anna brings up a great point. Look into GEDmatch and mapping out your DNA, of course. Yeah, that, and that's great when you have identified, or you have family members that you have tested.
He might be in the 1920 census as a boarder, and he's only with a father. He's young. He's only 14 years old on this census. But it's the same county.
Okay, it's still Phillips County. Oh,
no, in Chicago. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there.
Okay, let me see.
But it's
provided us this. And we don't. That's the thing. She didn't list who his dad was.
No, but I don't even think it's probably a brother, because it's such a small difference in age. It's 19 and 14.
Okay.
But it's interesting. Like, look at everybody boarding in this household.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different states,
Oh, so it was a boarding house.
Yeah, it was a boarding house.
Right. Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, and then it says that
that.
One of them, his parent is born in Kentucky and the other's in Georgia, or am I looking across? And there's a Dora Wright in the household who's 17 years old, also from Kentucky. So it might connect,
Interesting.
But that would have been, I would think this is very soon after arrival, no? If you're going to be in a boarding house, the 1930 looks a lot more settled. Like, you got a household, you've got your family unit. This looks more like when you hit a city and you got to find someplace to live. I don't know.
I'm not sure if this is him though, because her father was supposed to be born in Arkansas, and this person's got a birthplace of Kentucky and parents born in Georgia. And based on the oral history she has about her paternal grandmother, she was born in Mississippi, so we should be
it's the
seeing,
wrong age. She should be 10 years younger too, right? No, wait, it says 1906. No, he's born 1906.
He was born 1924.
Oh, 1924. Oh, okay, sorry.
He'd only be 6 years old.
He's only be 6. So
Bernice is asking, is this information from her mother?
Sorry.
I have no way of knowing if that is his information from her mother. I would imagine it had to have come from her mother. or potential other family members. Yeah, I think in terms of moving forward, you definitely need, she's definitely going to need to get that maternal family member DNA tested. There's no way you can proceed forward with confirming that he's the right person until you have that. I mean, you can, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be almost like, needle in a haystack trying to make sure that you can confirm that that he's the right person if you don't have somebody on that side of the family tested. But outside of that, and really, working that timeline, as Shelley always hammers home, you want to account for all of that time that they are in Chicago, because you know that they're there. You've got deed records that you can research online that are publicly available for Chicago, especially if he owned his house and you know where it is on the South Side. Also, look at churches. What church did he go to? Look at the more prominent, churches that are there. Got to send a shout out to St. Luke Missionary Baptist Church, because that's where my grandmother was.
City directories are also.
I was going to say city directories are pretty key as well. And you guys got to remember, we're talking current times. He didn't die until 2007. So, we're looking church records. We talked about military. The census is only so good until 1940. You got to remember, there are a lot of people left off in 1940. They estimate over 1 million African Americans were left off in 1940. She says that she did find him in 1940. The other thing is we're leaving out a piece here too. If she found him in 1940, there's a column that says, where were you living April 1st, 1935? That will tell you or confirm where he was. If he was in Chicago, that will give you a roundabout idea about when he got there. But if you look for him there in that time period and you don't find him, maybe he got there right after April 1st. I mean, there's a number of different things that you can do, but she's got to spend the time chiseling away at that timeline and establishing where he was. We talked about newspapers. We talked about the Chicago Defender, and mortuaries, identifying where his body was taken for his funeral rites and things like that. Was it a Rayner, one of the larger or well-known mortuaries in Chicago? There's gosh, I could just go on and on and on about the possibilities that are here. But I would say don't give up. But there definitely needs to be a little bit more work that are done. That's done. Also, I forgot about this too. I mentioned deed records. Those are available for current times for Cook County. Search those online by name. Also, Superior Court records. We're looking for any civil court cases, family law, any of that stuff. That is available online for Cook County. And if you can't find it online, go down to the courthouse, or go to the office of the particular person, so that you can track backwards. Go ahead, Angela.
I was just going to say, I would also suggest to also look for the benevolent societies, the Masonic organizations. Was he a Prince Hall Mason? Was he in the Grand United Order of Oddfellows? That's the Black Oddfellows Association. Was he in the Knights of Peter Claver? Whatever. But particularly, this is something that oftentimes is part of the social fabric in Black communities. And he lived a good span of years. He's born in the 20s and didn't pass away until 10 years ago. So he probably had a very full life that could have covered many, many, many arenas. And I would definitely look there. James has given us a lot, and he's helped me a lot, just sharing some of the many proceedings from various years in the states that I research. And these proceedings are often public. Their members are frequently mentioned, the various offices that they held, but also sometimes the roles that they played. And so there's a lot that could be gleaned from that. And do the same thing with the brothers, if he had brothers. Because again, you may find him through his family.
A couple of things I mentioned in the chat. I had asked early on, are we 100% sure that he was Black? And I imagine her DNA would answer that. And also mentioned checking prison records or arrest records. But do we know that he was Black for sure?
That's a question she would have to answer. I don't know.
just because I found several things related to an Eddie Wright in Chicago, but they were not very complimentary, but he was a white man. But there's several things that I found, you know, in the correct time period, and that's what made me think to ask.
Very interesting.
There's Anna found what she believes is a 1930 census record, and this is where we're getting the Phillips County, Arkansas from. The details pretty much match up with who we believe, you know, who she believes her father is. I'm going to go ahead and share this with everybody so you can see it, because the locations match up. All of that matches up. This is 1930 in Phillips County, Arkansas. We're looking at line 22 here. We've got an Eddie Wright, head of household, listed as Black, Leela as a wife, age 22, and a son named Edward, age 5. And if you look at locations of birth, we've got Mississippi, which matches up with what was provided, in Arkansas for him. And then if you know, if we're going to consider this Eddie as being the right person in Leela, we've got a father's birthplace and mother's birthplace of Louisiana for Eddie, and then Mississippi for Leela, which to me, as we were talking about earlier, it lends itself back to Delta. These are Delta people. You will see that a lot in this particular region of the country. People just move back and forth between Louisiana and Mississippi, and Arkansas a lot, in that whole region. So, Ona, if you have not seen this record, you know, please let us know, and I'll send you the link for that if that is indeed the right thing. So without further ado, thank you so much. Let us know what you find. Tyrone says, tilt your camera up, Angela, because we can't see your face. Or down, rather.
Okay.
So moving forward, thank you so much, Ona, for sharing your story with us tonight. If you have a research question, conundrum, query, whatever it is, something that you cannot get past, but you want folks to weigh in on, feel free to submit your case to Ask Mariah. You can find the link to submit your case in the description area of each and every BlackProGen Live episode. And of course, you don't have to be famous to be on this. You don't have to be sitting on PBS. And we're not paid to do this at all. This is just from the goodness of our hearts, but we want to make sure that everybody gets as far back as they possibly can. So thank you, Ona, for sharing your situation, and keep us updated with your research. Moving forward, before we close out, gotta hit current events. This one, since this show is rescheduled, we actually kind of backtrack a little bit. This story was shared by the Commercial Appeal here in Tennessee. It talks about a small plot of land in Cheatham County, Tennessee, known as Belltown Cemetery, that has more than 30 graves, including 2 World War I veterans, 3 World War II veterans, and 5 generations of Joyce family members. The cemetery has been used by African Americans since the emancipation, but recently the peace has been disturbed. The families of the deceased can no longer access the burial ground. Going further, the story talks about Kenneth Joyce. On July 24th, he went to clean up the plots where his twin brothers, Ronald and Donald, war veteran George, and other dear ones are buried. He drove his gold car to the dirt road only to find the gates locked. He removed the first from its hinges and forced through the second, according to an affidavit. Then the cemetery, the person who owns the land adjoining the cemetery, called the sheriff and had Joyce charged with criminal trespassing and vandalism. The affidavit notes that there was a weed cutter in Joyce's vehicle and the grass around the gravestones was freshly cut. Joyce mentioned, "I'm just down here to keep my loved ones clean, leave some flowers like everyone else do in the United States." So I bring up this story to say, or just to kind of initiate the conversations, this stuff is happening all over the place. When, you've got gentrification happening, we're leaving our ancestral locations, in droves to go to major metropolitan areas. Cemeteries are left behind. People end up purchasing the land, and then a huge debate potentially or fight can happen because the person who, ends up buying the land, they may know there's a cemetery there, but they don't want you visiting it, even though legally you're supposed to be able to. So we know Theresa has had a furrow in this
hijack the land.
One of the two. But this is an issue that's going to continually happen. You know, we're all living in major metropolitan areas. We've left our ancestral locations behind, including our deceased loved ones. What do you do in a scenario where the property owner won't give you access to your ancestors' graves? What do you do, especially if you're being charged with vandalism and all sorts of other things?
Going to court.
That's one that's going to play out in the courts. It's going to play out in court. Yeah, it's going to have to.
We have
And throw the book out and throw the legal statutes out.
We have another case in Newark with one of our ancestral cemeteries where it's owned by a private family, and now the folks are organizing to basically take that land away, have the state take that land away and make it a state-owned property. Because like this story, it's very similar where they're banning people from access because the family sees it as, you know, their space, even though when it was founded, it was open to everybody. So, you know, descendants have to gather together, concerned citizens of these places need to gather together and make it known. This is unacceptable. Our ancestors have a right to have their descendants remember where they're buried, and they have a right to rest in peace. And there ain't any going around it. That's it.
No. No, I agree.
But it has to be protected by law, so that, you know, that move to have the historical designation becomes really, really important, and it's not a quick process.
No, it is not. Definitely want to put that on everyone's radar. So next story, just to give you a heads up, talks about, this is Washington Post, September 7th. Information wanted by a mother concerning her children. This talks about ads that were placed in newspapers following emancipation. Those ads are now being digitized in a project called Last Seen: Finding Family After Slavery, which is run by Villanova University's Graduate History Program in collaboration with Philadelphia's Mother Bethel AME Church. And so this is going to be a huge database. It'll probably be super duper valuable to a lot of people who are doing African ancestor genealogy research. This was something that was sent over by James Morgan. So
and I'm gonna jump in here because I have a great story behind this. There's a book out called Help Me to Find My People, the African American Search for Families Lost in Slavery, of which this is a part of, by Heather Andrea Williams. I had the pleasure of meeting Angela and Renata and Shelley in Richmond. We all listened to Professor Philip Troutman's talk on the domestic slave trade. One of the best things he mentioned was what he's doing currently, which is he's taken, you know, he's like, look, I'm not African American, I'm not a genealogist, I'm a family historian, what can I do? He has gone ahead and recreated family trees on Ancestry. He calls this crowdsourcing genealogy, where given the information in these information wanted ads, he's then started to create these trees with the hope that, we know if you put a name in, you know, in the future, maybe descendants of these people will be reunited. And I can't say what a friggin' awesome thing that was to do. I think it is the best. I give it up to him. This notion of crowdsourcing genealogy, I hope it takes hold, because this is just a beautiful thing to me.
Absolutely. There are people who are doing it all over the place, but I think the uniqueness about this particular thing is that it's being done for people who have since died and may not have been reunited with their family members. And potentially, you know, folks will start to build those trees out, and, you know, they'll find that there's a missing link, and they may have a name, or maybe there was something passed down via oral history, and here's this tree out there that he has put out there. So I definitely think that is an awesome asset. I'm so glad that he's put that out there. In addition,
doing the trees, I'm sorry, but did he wind up doing the trees according to like the Beyond Kin thing, or differently? Because I was wondering about those standards, or that, if people are using that now or not.
No.
I don't know. I don't think so.
All right.
No. Just short answer is no.
Okay, cool. All right.
All right, last piece of current events. Of course, there's no way we could have this show and not talk about this. So, because it's historical implications here, this is by Jelani Cobb in the New Yorker. It was a great piece. I'll read the first paragraph. 60 years ago, Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas became a flashpoint in the nascent civil rights movement when Governor Orville Fabus refused to abide by a Supreme Court decision in Brown versus the Board of Education. Fabus famously deployed the state's National Guard to prevent 9 African-American students from attending classes at the high school. In the midst of the crisis, a high school journalist interviewing Louis Armstrong, as in the Louis Armstrong, about an upcoming tour, asked the musician about his thoughts on the situation, prompting Armstrong to refer to the Arkansas governor as several varieties of MF. They actually put the word in the story, but we don't know who's listening. In the interest of finding a principal quote, his label for Fabus was changed to ignorant plowboy. Armstrong, who was scheduled to perform in the Soviet Union as a cultural ambassador on behalf of the State Department, canceled the tour, a display of dissent that earned him the scorn and contempt of legions of whites, shocked by the trumpeter's apparent lack of patriotism. As his historian Penny von Eschen notes in Satchmo Blows Up the World, a history of the American usage of Black culture as a tool of the Cold War, students at the University of Arkansas accused Armstrong of, quote, creating an issue where there was none, end quote, and joined the procession of groups canceling Armstrong's scheduled concerts. So I bring this up to ask a question. Why is time more kind to people of color when it comes to how they resisted against racism and inequality? Is it simply because they're dead?
That has a lot to do with it. For some people.
Or is there more to it?
Well, this stuff is on a continuum. It doesn't just stop.
Nothing's new. Nothing's new. We know what happened to Ali when he was saying no. He had no issues with people from Vietnam, and we certainly know what happened to our Olympians when they didn't take a knee. They simply just raised a glove, and we know that anytime something political was happening, especially to people of African ancestry, many times they would turn to the athlete. Well, what do you think? And of course, there was a litmus test. They better give the right answer. Suddenly their career as an athlete, aka entertainer, is suddenly in jeopardy. And this is nothing new at all. And so ironic, we're talking about people respectfully protesting. They're not being belligerent as they take a knee. They are quietly kneeling. And yet the one flag that fought against them is offensive. That's not seen as something that a traitor would wave. I mean, there's so many things that are there. Nothing is new. Nothing is new under the sun. And of course, we have people in our own, even in our own genealogical circles, once in a while, they'll say, what are they so nervous about? Why are they so afraid? Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. I take pride in knowing that my ancestors and all our people have been the friggin' conscious of this country.
Sure.
Since the beginning. Are we afraid of what they say when we bend a knee or when we raise a fist? Hell no. We're going to keep doing it because it is in our patriotic genes that we do so, that we make sure this country is constantly reminded of the promises made and were unkept. Okay, so I praise my ancestors for being the conscience of this country, and I will be as uppity as they want to be. Okay, let's be real.
We all qualify as uppity.
And I'm going to be as ungrateful and everything else. I just want to say that.
Well, I think some of this is, there are several people that I've seen have actually kind of circled the point back because it's been made about the flag and the anthem, and it's really not about that. It's about the conversations that need to be had. And I think as a community, when it comes to family history research, there's always a tie back to this because it's historical. We're we're developing and adding flesh to the narratives of our family members and our ancestors. And, you know, that's the reason why I harken back to this story, is because it talked about Louis Armstrong, who is beloved. I mean, ask a person walking down the street, think about just the montages that they do at the end of the sports season. They're playing It's a Wonderful World. Think about that. But yet this man was canceled from tours because he stood up and he made a decision. But that part of the narrative is never shared. Right?
It's because they become symbols. It's like he becomes like an image on a record. Like they don't think about him as a man with all this life and all the struggles that he had to face being who he was, you know? And I think that's kind of what happens with Ali. And you can't sweep this stuff away. No, you cannot.
No, but it does raise the issue that we need new forms of resistance, because our ancestors did not have to deal with the fact that in prime time, we're being told that what we're seeing is not so. Okay, right. You know, and then there's this level of social media. Like I posted on my Facebook wall, a Black Lives Matter ad was placed on Facebook, targeted in Baltimore and Ferguson by Russians. Okay, this is a level of insidiousness and co-optation that's happening. And do we have the resources? Do we have the power to change what's happening? Because what's happening is scary. We don't know the level of resistance that these guys have had against us. It is getting to be at a level that we need to rise up in a way where we're not allowing them to co-opt. The fact that you have a person to say, okay, kneeling is about the flag, when it was never about the flag.
No.
It was about police brutality. So what are we doing to maintain the focus on what the kneeling was about? We need to
and that's where our community comes into play. That's the reason why we're having this conversation, is because you don't have to be a descendant of Louis Armstrong. You don't have to be a descendant of Fred Drumpf or whatever the name was that he came from, you know, wherever he came from with it. No. The narrative can be changed, the colors can be added, the flesh can be put on the bone when we are telling our ancestral stories from the perspective of a person of color, and we're sharing them honestly. We're not just throwing out the nice, pretty pieces like tonight. Think about it. We could have had the entire conversation about Latin genealogy, and you guys could have totally not mentioned the fact that people could pay for whiteness.
Oh, no. That wasn't going to pass by me.
Now, I know you guys were not going to not cover that. I know you guys were not going to not cover that, but think about it. I mean, honestly, you all think about it, because in essence, people they may not have gone to a municipality or to a priest to have that done, but folks have been cleansed in the United States. That's passing.
Right, but people have gone to the church and torn the pages out of books. People have like done their genealogy, like somebody would tell me like years ago, somebody would do their genealogy, and as soon as they realized that their ancestor was the person of color with the same name, not like the founder or the High Muthima, they just stopped. They just did not want to know, and they just kind of closed that door. But people don't do that anymore. At least this generation doesn't.
Yes, they do.
So?
Absolutely, they do. Let me show you how it's happening. When you get your DNA test results and you see faces that look like ours in there, and you deliberately don't reach out to them, even though they're some of your highest matches, because then you have to confront the nature of what created that relationship.
Right.
So that is happening. They may not have a book to rip some pages out of, but they're trying to get rid of that double helix and them centimorgans. It happens every single day. Or you know, I told you guys I had somebody who was a high match that completely decapitated their father's side of the tree off the tree. Like that was going to change me showing up in their DNA results. This is a level of denial. It's widespread denial. And it keeps getting blanketed by a flag or an anthem. No, it is a hard, tough conversation.
Yes.
That we've spent years avoiding. Like we want to make it about this, but it's not really about that. So I'm every week I admonish everybody, share your stories. This week, my husband he does not get involved with political nothing. And people who follow me on social media know, how in the world is he living with you? And he doesn't put anything on social media about anything. But even
and Calvin's not even on it. I don't know. It's like over here and over there, but this is 20 years together. I don't know.
Exactly. We got 10 over here, but still. Yeah. But I bring that up because in his circle, he's been an athlete. He's played professional sports. He's gone to schools where he's the minority, and people in his circle seem to believe that my husband has never dealt with discrimination or racism because we are good people.
No, not that.
But it's true, you all. It's true, you all. And until you share those stories that you've unearthed in your research, or that you've experienced as a person of color, that your circle of friends and your circle of colleagues is going to continue to believe that my friends haven't dealt with that. Well, yes, they have. They just haven't told you that.
Well, we can also think our parents haven't dealt with it. My dad is a very light-skinned Mexican, and he grew up speaking Spanish fluently because he was, from the age of 5, was raised by his Mexican immigrant grandmother. And I took my parents to go see Zoot Suit in LA this year. And after that, we went to El Cholo in downtown LA, and fabulous Mexican restaurant, historic Mexican restaurant. And I asked my dad about that. I've never in my life heard him talk about racism. And he, for the first time, opened up. At 72 years old, for the first time, opened up about what he faced. My parents, my mother is Irish, English, and Scottish. And they told me about people they knew. My parents dated for 4 years before getting married, neighbors and friends who wouldn't come to their wedding because my mother married a Mexican. I had never heard this. And I'm the family historian that interviews them all the time. But these aren't the stories they share with us.
Well,
not always. It's not the stories they share with us. And I'm doing a lot of research right now with the repatriation of Mexicans in the 1920s and 30s. And they were finding the same thing, that it was they suppressed it. It was traumatic. It was shameful. They suppressed it. So we have new generations that are just starting to discover this about their own parents and grandparents.
The same with mine. Sorry about that. Yeah, because you all know my mom and my dad. And, I find that they're constantly trying to get their story to me. And sometimes it's almost apologetic. Because of me being Black and white, and I get that same thing too as Colleen. So I understand what she's saying.
I do too. I mean, I going to school and going to a lot of the places. I mean, my grandfather couldn't read a newspaper. Okay, he looked at the pictures in the paper and he had a photographic memory. So then he got to be a numbers runner when he was a young man. Okay. And then I had a great grandmother who was she was a madam. And I think that happened because she was, what do you sell when you're left high and dry, So these are all stories that we can find in every one of our families, I'm sure, but it's amazing the weight that people take, or the time they take to bury these things because of the shame later on,
I think you're right, but this is where our job comes into play.
Yeah.
When we're up presenting, when we're up, when we're on social media, when we're in conversations, I always wherever I am, you all, because this is a part of who we are. Genealogy, family history research is a part of who we are. It's our duty, knowing who we are, when we're in discussions at dinners and, whatever else. If you hear history being presented in a way that is not accurate, that's your job. That's your purpose in life, is to illuminate. Well, not exactly, and sometimes, some people aren't very as vocal as we are, and if you're not, then take to your blog, challenge the narrative that's out there about your ancestors. you know, and the trajectory that's being painted, or just, you know, in your circle. And I you know, that's the thing. Right now we're in very volatile times, but I think history, and I think the connecting people to family and the stories that you know, cross the, you know, the ocean, or just cross the different continents, that's a potentially unifying piece. And if somebody chooses to ignore history or the facts, that's because they're just in denial, period. So any remaining thoughts?
Yeah, and I'll always end what I tell people. Our obligations as descendants, I always say, is to tell the truth. Tell the true stories, the good, the bad, the ugly. Tell the stories that were true. And if you have the receipts to back it up, so be it. I'm all about truth telling.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. That was our current events. Of course, we've always got to have current events. And thank you so much. We actually have viewers who have written us telling us, thank you so much for sharing current events from a historical or a genealogical perspective, because it gives them an outlet to be able to talk about it from that framing. But just to remind everybody, dive in with us as we discuss this year's season of PBS's Finding Your Roots with Dr. Henry Louis Gates. Get fresh perspective about the high notes and low notes from genealogists and family historians of color. Don't miss the next episode of BlackProGen Live, airing Wednesday, October 11th at the same time we always air. We're moving to Wednesdays in October so we can all watch the episodes of Finding Your Roots, and then of course digest everything and talk about it the next day. So don't forget that our next episode is Wednesday, October 11th, 6 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Also, the end of 2017 is shaping up to be nice topic-wise when it comes to BlackProGen Live. Don't forget to set your reminders for upcoming episodes, such as our always fun Finding Your Roots recaps, People of Color in the Northeast, Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes, and Writing Your Family History. Set reminders on my YouTube channel today so you don't miss any of our upcoming exciting broadcasts. Also, don't forget to check out Research at the National Archives and Beyond Blog Talk Radio with Bernice Bennett. Tomorrow night, she's going to be talking about the price for their pound of flesh with Diana Ramsey Berry, which is going to be a great show talking about how values were assessed for slaves. The next iteration of the African Roots podcast is taking place this Friday, September 29th, 2017. Care of Angela Walton Raji. Also, don't forget to check out our Bud Dear Myrtle with Mondays with Myrt and Wacky Wednesday. They actually had it tonight. They were talking with Blaine Bettinger about DNA, and she made sure she headed on over to our chat room afterwards to make sure that we saw her face. And she was there, so we give Myrt some love. She did show up for us tonight. Don't forget as well, get the latest and greatest from BlackProGen in your inbox. Subscribe to The Lowdown today. The Lowdown is a collective feed of our blogs, podcasts, and products and more from the panelists on BlackProGen Live, as well as our friends. Be sure to check the description of this recording and any BlackProGen Live episode for the link to subscribe to The Lowdown today. And of course, it goes without saying, don't forget to join the convo. Tweet us at BlackProGen. Use the hashtag BlackProGen and participate in the live chat, which we had a large amount of chatters tonight. We want to send a shout out tonight to Wanda Looney, Kim Cotton, my bud from California made it. Colleen, I don't know if you saw that, but Kim was there. Karen Galloway, Isis Michioski, Tanya Sanders, Tyrone Kraft, as always. Denise Muhammad always joins us. Karen Galloway. Anna, thanks so much for your expertise in the chat room, along with Gigi, had a name, Gerald. Shelly Murphy was there. BJ Smothers, been a lot of folks. We just thank you all so much for joining us. And don't forget, watch Finding Your Roots. And keep your notepad close, because there are going to be things we're going to discuss. You're probably going to get mad because parts get skipped. You're like, how did they get there? It's a huge jump. That's okay. You'll have a space to be able to talk about it on Wednesday, October 11th. So thank you again for joining us for BlackProGen Live.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good evening. Bye.